How does the tech that runs our world really work? We break it down to its fundamental truths. This is First Principles.
Imagine for a moment that you are trapped in a diving bell at the bottom of the ocean. You are perfectly conscious. You can see through the glass. You can hear the creaking of the metal. You have vivid thoughts, memories, and desires. But the controls are on the outside. You scream, but the water swallows the sound. You push against the walls, but they don't budge. This is not a hypothetical nightmare. For people with locked-in syndrome, caused by strokes or neurodegenerative diseases like ALS, this is life. They are ghosts haunting their own bodies. But then, a team of scientists wheels a cart into the room. They place a small square chip, no larger than a baby aspirin, onto the surface of the brain. A cable runs from the head to a computer. The screen flickers. A cursor sits in the center. The patient thinks about moving their hand to the right. The hand doesn't move, it can't. But on the screen, the cursor slides to the right. It clicks an icon. It types a letter. The ghost has broken out of the machine. It feels like pure magic. It feels like telepathy. We assume that the computer is somehow reading the patient's mind, listening to their inner monologue. But how does this actually work? What simple physical rules allow a wet, squishy organ to control a digital operating system? Today, on First Principles, we are going to crack open the skull and look at the wiring. We are decoding brain-computer interfaces. To understand the magnitude of this technology, we have to start with the user experience. It is easy to look at a headline about Neuralink or a university research lab and think of it as a novelty. But for the people actually using these systems, the experience is profound, bordering on spiritual. Let's talk about Jan. Jan Scheuermann was a quadriplegic woman who volunteered for a BCI study at the University of Pittsburgh. She hadn't moved her arms or legs in years. She had a port installed in her skull, connected to electrodes resting on her motor cortex. When they turned the system on, they connected it to a robotic arm. Jan didn't have to type commands. She didn't have to use eye-tracking software. She just did what you do every second of every day. She intended. She looked at a chocolate bar, and she wanted to grab it. The robotic arm reached out, the fingers curled around the wrapper, and it brought the chocolate to her mouth. She took a bite. It was the first time she had fed herself in a decade. When you watch the video of that moment, you see the pure joy on her face. It looks effortless. And that effortlessness is the seductive part of the technology. It creates an illusion that the barrier between mind and matter has dissolved. We look at that and think, the computer knows what she wants. The computer is reading her thoughts. If she thought about a purple elephant, the computer would see a purple elephant. We imagine that the wire is a pipeline for consciousness itself. But that is the magic trick. That is the illusion we need to strip away. Because if you actually look at what is traveling down that wire, you don't find words. You don't find images of chocolate bars. You don't find feelings of hunger or joy. You find noise. You find a chaotic, screaming electrical storm. The bridge between that storm and the smooth motion of a robotic arm is not magic. It is a series of translation problems. It is an engineering challenge that requires us to treat the human brain not as a mystical seat of the soul, but as an electrical generator. Before we can understand the solution, we have to understand the problem. The problem is that the brain is locked in a black box. The skull is an incredible piece of armor. It is designed to withstand impact, to protect the consistency of the gray matter inside, which is roughly the texture of soft tofu. Evolution prioritized protection over connectivity. We have only 5 narrow windows out of this box: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And we have one way out: muscles. Every single thing you have ever done in your life, from writing a symphony to hugging your child, was executed by a muscle contracting. That is our only output channel. When the spinal cord is severed, or when the motor neurons die, that output channel is cut. The generator is still running, the lights are on, but the transmission line is down. For centuries, this was a dead end. But in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we started to realize something fundamental about the generator itself. We realized it ran on electricity. In the 1920s, a German psychiatrist named Hans Berger fell off his horse during military training and was nearly run over by an artillery carriage. His sister, miles away, suddenly felt a terrible sense of dread and sent him a telegram asking if he was okay. Berger, shaken by the coincidence, became obsessed with the idea of psychic energy. He wanted to find the physical basis of telepathy. He failed at finding telepathy, but he succeeded in something else. He attached electrodes to a human scalp and hooked them up to a galvanometer. He saw a wobble, a rhythmic oscillating line. He had discovered the alpha wave. He had invented the electroencephalogram, or EEG. This was the first time we listened to the brain. But there was a problem. Listening to the brain from outside the skull is like standing outside a massive concrete football stadium during the Super Bowl, trying to hear a conversation between two people in the front row. You can hear the roar of the crowd. You can tell when a touchdown happens because the volume spikes. You can tell when the game is over, but you cannot hear the quarterback calling the play. You cannot hear the specific instructions. The skull, the scalp, and the fluid surrounding the brain blur the signal. For a BCI to work, for a woman to feed herself chocolate with a robot arm, we need to hear the quarterback. We need specificity. And to get that, we have to go inside the stadium. This brings us to our first principle, the source. What is the fundamental unit of information in the brain? It isn't a thought, it's a spike, an action potential. To understand a BCI, you have to understand that your brain is not a computer in the way your laptop is. It doesn't use binary code, zeros and ones flowing in orderly logic gates. It uses ion gradients. Imagine a single neuron. It's a tiny cell with a long tail called an axon. The inside of the cell is negatively charged compared to the outside. It's like a tiny battery, holding a charge of about -70 millivolts. It maintains this charge by pumping sodium ions out and potassium ions in. It is a chemical standoff. When a neuron receives enough signals from its neighbors, it reaches a tipping point. Little doors in the cell wall, called ion channels, slam open. Sodium rushes in. The voltage shoots up. It spikes. Then the potassium rushes out, and the voltage drops back down. This entire event takes about 1 millisecond. That pop, that spike is the only language the brain speaks. Everything you are, everything you hope for, is just billions of these salty pops happening in concert. When you decide to move your hand, a specific ensemble of neurons in your motor cortex, the strip of brain tissue that runs across the top of your head like a headphone band, starts popping. Here is the crucial part. The brain is geographically organized. It has a map. The neurons that control your thumb are right next to the neurons that control your index finger. They are distinct. If we want to build a BCI, we need to place a sensor right on top of that specific neighborhood. We are not listening to the whole stadium anymore. We are lowering a microphone down from the blimp right into the section where the thumb movers are sitting. The most common invasive sensor used today is called the Utah array. It looks like a tiny hairbrush, but it is incredibly small. Smaller than a penny. The bristles of the brush are 100 tiny silicon needles. Each needle is an electrode. When a surgeon implants this into the motor cortex, those needles press down into the tissue. They sit right next to the neurons. Now, when the neuron fires, when that sodium rushes in and the voltage spikes, the needle picks up that tiny change in the electric field. It's like holding a microphone next to the quarterback's mouth. We can finally hear the play call. So, we have the signal. We have a wire coming out of the head carrying a stream of crackling static. Each crackle is a neuron firing. But now we face the second and perhaps more difficult hurdle, the language barrier. The neuron is firing. Crackle, crackle, silence, crackle. What does that mean? Does it mean move left? Does it mean move right? Does it mean I'm hungry? The neuron doesn't speak English. It doesn't speak Python or C++. It just fires. This leads us to the second principle, decoding. A BCI is not a mind reader. It is a pattern matcher. This is the part that is often misunderstood. We assume the scientist knows the code, that they have a dictionary where 3 spikes means up and 4 spikes means down. They don't. The code is different for every single person, and it changes every single day. The brain is plastic. It rewires itself constantly. So we have to teach the computer to understand this specific brain right now. This process is called calibration. When Jan is connected to the system, she doesn't just start moving the robot. First, she has to play a game. A technician puts a cursor on the screen and says, "Okay, Jan, imagine moving the cursor to the left." Jan imagines it. She vividly visualizes her hand moving left. Her motor cortex fires. The computer records that specific storm of electrical spikes. Then the technician says, "Okay, imagine moving right." Jan imagines it. The firing pattern changes. The computer records that. They do this over and over again. Up, down, grab, release. The computer is building a statistical model. It looks at the data and says, "Okay, whenever I see electrode 45 firing rapidly and electrode 12 being silent, Jan is usually trying to go left. Whenever electrode 12 goes crazy, she wants to go right." It finds the correlation between the neural firing rate and the intended velocity of the movement. This is the translation layer. It turns the biological pop into a digital command, Zaxxas -10. This reveals a major misconception about BCIs. People worry that Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg will be able to read their private thoughts, their secrets, their political views. But based on first principles, that is incredibly unlikely with current motor cortex technology. The sensor is sitting in the movement part of the brain. It is listening to the engine room, not the library. It can tell if you want to move your hand, but it can't tell why you want to move your hand. It sees the mechanics, not the semantics. To read a thought or a memory, we would need to be in a completely different part of the brain, like the hippocampus or the frontal lobe, and the coding there is exponentially more complex and abstract than the spatial mapping of the motor cortex. So, we have the signal and we have the decoder, but there is a hidden complexity here, an unseen giant that makes this whole system viable, and it is something most people never think about. The giant is the noise. The environment inside the brain is hostile to electronics. It is wet, salty, and warm, the perfect recipe for corrosion. But more than that, it is electrically noisy. The brain is a soup of background chatter. There are billions of neurons firing, blood vessels pulsing, muscles in the scalp twitching. The signal from a single neuron is microvolts, millionths of a volt. It is a whisper in a hurricane. If you just plugged that raw signal into a cursor, it would jitter uncontrollably. It would look like a seismograph during an earthquake. The unseen giant that solves this is a piece of mathematics called spike sorting and the Kalman filter. Before the computer even tries to figure out if you want to go left or right, it has to decide what is a signal and what is garbage. It looks at the waveform of the electricity. A neuron spike has a very specific shape, a sharp up, a sharp down, and a recovery. The software scans the chaotic stream of noise in real time, hunting for that specific shape. It throws away everything else. Then it uses a Kalman filter. This is an algorithm originally developed for guiding missiles and spacecraft. It is designed to estimate the state of a system that you can't perfectly measure. In a BCI, the filter predicts where the cursor should be based on the previous millisecond, and it smooths out the jitter. It assumes that a human hand doesn't teleport, it moves in a trajectory. It adds a layer of physics to the raw intent. Without this heavy mathematical lifting, the cursor would be unusable. The magic isn't just in the brain, and it isn't just in the chip. It's in the algorithm that scrubs the dirt off the window so we can see through. There is another layer to this unseen giant, and it is perhaps the most profound part of the BCI story. It's called co-adaptation. We tend to think of the BCI as a tool the brain learns to use, like a hammer, or we think of it as a machine that learns the brain. But in reality, it is a two-way street. The machine is learning Jan's brain patterns, but Jan's brain is also learning the machine. This is the concept of neuroplasticity in action. When Jan first tries to move the cursor, her brain fires its usual move arm pattern. The computer tries its best to interpret it. Maybe it gets it 80% right. But then, Jan sees the cursor move. Her brain gets visual feedback. "Oh," the brain says, "that didn't quite go left enough. I need to push harder on this specific neural pathway." The brain actually changes its firing pattern to better suit the algorithm. Simultaneously, the algorithm is updating its map to better suit the brain. They are tuning each other. They are dancing. After a few weeks, the user often describes a shift. At first, they are thinking, move hand, move hand. It requires intense focus. But eventually, the brain incorporates the cursor into its body schema. The cursor becomes a body part. They stop thinking about the hand and start thinking about the cursor. The middleman of the imagined arm disappears. The neurons rewire to control the digital object directly. This is the true aha moment. The technology doesn't just read the human, it expands the definition of the human. The tool becomes part of the self. This leads us to the future and the hurdles that remain. If the principles are this clear, detect the spike, decode the pattern, filter the noise, why don't we all have chips in our heads? Why are we still using keyboards and mice? The answer lies in the harsh reality of the biology. The body hates foreign objects. When you stick a silicone brush into the brain, the body reacts. It treats it like a splinter. Astrocytes and microglia, the brain's immune defense, swarm the electrodes. They encapsulate them in scar tissue. This scar tissue acts like insulation. Over months or years, the signal gets quieter and quieter. The microphone gets muffled. Eventually, the BCI stops working. This is the foreign body response, and it is the single biggest barrier to long-term BCI use. Current research is trying to solve this by making the electrodes softer, more flexible, more like the brain tissue itself. Companies like Neuralink are using hair-thin threads that move with the brain, minimizing damage. Others are trying to read the signal from inside the blood vessels, sliding a stent electrode up the jugular vein so they don't have to drill through the skull at all. We are trying to sneak the spy into the stadium without breaking down the door. So, let's step back and look at the whole picture. We started with the magic of a paralyzed person moving a robotic arm with their mind. It seemed like wizardry, but we stripped it down. We saw that it isn't magic, it's a chain of physical events. It starts with the first principle of electricity. The neuron is a battery that releases a spike of voltage. This is the raw data. It moves to the principle of specificity. We place sensors on the map of the motor cortex to catch the signals related to movement, not memory or emotion. It relies on the principle of decoding. We use algorithms to find the statistical correlation between those electrical pops and specific directions in space. And it is held together by the unseen giant of signal processing and co-adaptation, the math that cleans the noise and the plasticity that allows the brain and the machine to learn each other's language. Understanding this changes how we look at ourselves. We are not indivisible spirits. We are distinct biological processes. We are engines that generate data, and if we can access that data, we can transcend our biological limits. We can give a voice to the voiceless. We can give motion to the paralyzed. But there is a final, lingering thought. When Jan Scheuermann feeds herself chocolate, or when Noland Arbaugh plays chess with his Neuralink, they are doing something that has never happened in the 4-billion-year history of life on Earth. Every other organism, from the first bacteria to the smartest human, interacts with the world through its body. Action requires muscle. We push, we pull, we bite, we speak. BCAs break that rule. They bypass the body entirely. They allow the will to act directly upon the world. Skipping the muscle, skipping the bone, this is a fundamental shift in what it means to be an agent in the universe. It forces us to ask, if I can act without my body, what is the essential part of me? Is it the hand that holds the cup, or is it the pattern of electricity that commands it? As we get better at wiring the ghost to the machine, the line between the human and the technology doesn't just blur, it becomes a loop. And in that loop, we might find that the black box of the brain isn't just a processor to be decoded, but a frontier that is waiting to be expanded. The technology is not just about restoring what was lost. It is about discovering what is possible when the mind is finally unchained from the limitations of the flesh.
You've been listening to First Principles. Until next time, stay curious.